What about other sports that are occupying young boys' time? Soccer, AFL. Do you see those as a threat to your growing audience?
It's an interesting question. There's 2 points to it. One, we're actually all trying to achieve the same thing, which is get people up and active. And as government and everyone else will tell you, that's almost the biggest challenge for every sport. Is we're not just competing with other sports, we're competing with other entertainment or non-entertainment options. So the more people playing sport in some ways, the better for us, because there are more people who are going to go and watch sport. Out of that, once you've got them playing, clearly you want to do well in your particular sport versus other sports. Rugby league has luckily always been a leader in terms of developing modified games and developing a lot of the standards that everyone takes for granted now. You know, going back into the 80s through people like Peter Corcoran, you know, rugby league's mini and mod league, the accreditation courses for coaches and referees. League was a prime mover in a lot of those areas, and remains very, very well focused in it. One of the important things in terms of the wider game and outside of the NRL, but the Australian or rugby ARL development area is instigated this year over the last 2 years, and the NRL's helped fund a League Pulse network, which is a sporting pulse network that through the name LeagueNet allows all of the junior clubs around Australia to come together via the one net, so that information, they can get standard information on draws, they can develop their own websites, they can interact with the central body and at the same time receive tools that will help them establish their own draws and run their own club and administer the club and give them administrative support. So that's another area of technology that comes down and helps this concept of who's going to play. But league numbers generally are extremely strong. We've had rises in rugby league numbers over the last few years. We're back at record levels there. I can't say it's an exact record now, but if you take the highlight of the game perhaps being the late 80s, in some areas we're well above those areas in other compared to that, and in other areas we're up near them. The figures will come in during the year, but the feedback we've got is that we've got enormous growth through our junior level. And we're a much wider game in terms of junior sport, particularly New South Wales and Queensland. One of the things people often forget is that we're actually running competitions right through the year, and the depth of our involvement through people committing to club and school competitions is enormous. Soccer is a great, extremely well, and not for a second do I say that we have higher numbers than soccer across the country, but soccer is a great sport, league's a great sport, AFL's a great sport at kids level, but when it comes to getting, and as is rugby, but when you come to getting people in competition through a year, league still stands up as a major sport at junior level. The interesting point to a lot of parents in getting into it is to understand the difference between the NRL and junior sport, because they are different beasts. You know, someone who does plays a game of sport at junior level versus senior level is playing two different games.
But the senior game is the one that will bring the kids into the game and it will bring the parents into the game. Are you finding through marketing that there are common objections that parents have about their children playing NRL or rugby league rather?
No, I think the image of the game at senior level is important. I think parents are able to differentiate between the two. I do think, though, that you need to be very careful about the image at the top of the game. You know, if you lose sight of the fact that people do want to feel positive about the sport they're associated with at any level, whether they're a fan or whether it's through their child playing, you have to be conscious of not only the image but actually the reality. And there are areas that every sport from time to time faces tests on, but it's one you've got to be conscious of, and we are conscious of. At senior level, for instance, issues such as foul play, all those things have to be managed. Players have to be held accountable if they break the rules at senior level. If you don't do that, then that will transfer down to a lack of faith at junior level. We work very hard not to lose that lack of faith.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine in sports, public relations probably plays a higher focus than advertising in your marketing mix. Would that be true of the NRL?
I think sports generally have that to an extent, largely because whether it's public relations or whether it's simply accepting the fact that you are in a public domain anyway. So you therefore have to be careful of how you are acting in that public domain and how you're responding. So if you were to, we did this with the clubs some years ago, if you were to say to the clubs, well look, if you catalogued your list of business assets, what would they be? one of those business assets would have to be your media space, because it's on the back of your media space that you in turn are able to drive a lot of sponsorship and a lot of other opportunities. So having that space, A, as being the sort of space someone wants to be associated with, and protecting that space is important. So therefore, in a sport like ours, you certainly take a close look on how it's going, where it's going, what the image is like, and also how your space is holding, because they're important factors.
How do you measure the effectiveness, or how does an advertiser measure the effectiveness of a sponsorship that they place with the NRL?
The effectiveness of that is best measured by when you come into the sponsorship, and this is something we've worked very hard with advertisers through our marketing director, Paul Kine, that you actually understand what you're trying to achieve out of it. You agree on what you're trying to do through the sponsorship, and that in turn will set your own objectives as to what you need to reach along the way. So in terms of measuring it, a lot of the measure comes back to what you, having established what you wanted to try and achieve on the way through. And we, last year, again through our marketing director Paul Kine, spent a lot of time going around to companies and saying, here's a lot about our sport. Understand some facts that you may or may not have assumed, because a lot of people, when a sport is as public as ours, will have their own views on it, and they sometimes will need some testing. The size and success of rugby league is something I think a lot of people take for granted, and you remind them of it. But at the end of the presentation, the point to it is that we sit down and talk about, instead of offering you a property, what we'd like to sit down is talk about where we can work together and what we can achieve together. By doing that,
sponsorship with Telstra is quite interesting, because it's not only involves signage and naming rights, but it also involves quite a bit of work that you do together online.
Yes, and it's a case of interacting beyond just saying, well, look, I want to see a number of mentions of a sponsor, or I want to see a number of shots on a TV set. Part of getting a sponsorship right is figuring out exactly why you want to be there, what you want to do with your company when you're there, and how we can help you achieve those aims. And that's a big part of what we try and do with sponsors. On the simple measurement side, we make sure, and we work very hard to have an independent company assess values of sponsorships, so that when we sit down with sponsors, we can relate to values and we can talk in terms of value achieved. But the real value in the sponsorship comes down with agreeing to what the sponsor wants to achieve out of it, understanding why they need to do that within their business, and helping them achieve it. And certainly there's a whole lot of examples within the Telstra sponsorship, I think, that show how you can work together beyond simply an awareness brand, and you actually can highlight the same sort of goals that the company's trying to achieve by working with them. And hopefully that's working well for them.
Well, it sounds like it's working well for them. They've been a partner of yours for a long time.